for you?
Recording is recorded. Okay, just checking that. And there we are still suffering, I guess, from this little delay, like about a 3-second delay between the time that I push the button and you actually see it at your end. So if I seem to be talking about something completely different, 3 seconds, hence the image should show up. I'll try not to make that too much of a problem. We went last spring on this hike, and I'm just going to see if I can get this thing to advance. Why is it not advancing for me? Oh, it is now.
That was a cat.
Yeah,
helping us plan our trip.
Last spring, and yeah, this is the cat helping us as usual with planning, always in the right place at the right time. It was pretty miserable when we left. The plane was being sprayed down with de-icing agent, and of course we had to head in completely the wrong direction for about 2,000 kilometers before we could come back and then head across to Portugal. It's a longish kind of trip. It was what, 10 hours, I think. So plenty of time to anticipate how nice it was going to be and how unpleasant it was on the plane. Portugal is pretty close to the same size as Newfoundland, tiny bit smaller, with the island of Newfoundland, yeah. Just to give you a feel, and we were in the southwest coast. That's where we did our hike. That's the red down there is the Rota Vicentina, and we hiked about 120 kilometers in the I think we were there for eight days, and 2 of them we just took it easy. But the 8 days of our time there, we covered about 120 kilometers. It's a much bigger trail, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So off we went, landed in Lisbon and poked around Lisbon for several days before heading south. Beautiful city, lovely restaurants, some fascinating sights in and around Lisbon. This amazing castle just south of the city with a spectacular botanical garden around it. Massive. These are Norfolk Island pine. Those little pine tree, not pines. These little protoconifers that people grow indoors, but they get huge when they're in the right environment. Beautiful parks, beautiful place to explore. One could say do a program just about poking around in the area of Lisbon and so on. Wonderful aquarium. Very enjoyable visit. But the real reason for our trip there was to go south of Lisbon and hike this trail. The entire trail is about 230 kilometers, so you see other numbers, but that seems to be the most walked section. And we did a hike starting up at Porto down to Villanova de Mil down to Almagrave, to Zambujeira do Mar, to Odissesh, and then finally to Algesur. And then the last day we did a little loop around Algesur and then back up to Lisbon and then back to Canada. So that was our section of coast, and we'll try to give you an idea of just how beautiful that area is and some of the diversity. These are just some of the plants that we saw that we'll be showing you. We couldn't possibly do the entire thing. Most of Portugal is pretty heavily settled, except for the mountains and the strip along the coast. You can see the green right along the coast. That's the coastal area that we hiked. But inland, it's all farmland and greenhouses and pretty heavily developed. Here's a low-angle view from Google, so you can see how rough the coast is. It's got cliffs and big sand beaches and beautiful little coves. The trail hugs the edge of the cliff for most of the way. Every now and then we had to go inland, and we'll talk about that as we go on. So our first section began at the little town of Porto, and it really is quite a small town. It's pretty much a tourist town now, although it was originally a fishing town. Lots of great restaurants and nice little places to stay. Not much nightlife at that time of year. It was pretty quiet because we were there in the spring, in March. And we found there that there was a great arrangement that whereby you could carry just your backpack, just a small day pack with whatever food and drink and extra clothing you needed, and you could send on your suitcases. In our case, it's just two carry-on bags by taxi. They had this whole system where the taxi would come and pick them up, and then they'd be labeled, and they'd drop them off day after day after day to the next place on your trip. And you didn't have to worry about them at all. It was a great system. Another low angle view of the trails. You can see there are trails that go along the shore, little ones made by people just wandering around, and also trails that go up to the top of the picture. And those are going to roads, because originally these headlands were being visited mostly by fishermen, people who were doing cliff fishing or beach fishing. And that's what made this area popular in the first place. And so this is often called the Fisherman's Trail, the whole long trail that we were hiking. There's also a historic trail that is a bit farther inland that you can drive or you can walk, and it visits a number of smaller towns and has a slightly different focus than the Fisherman's Trail. But we were interested in the wildlife and the vegetation and the geology, so here we go. The trails that run along the shore are marked by different colored stripes, each one for a different trail. And in this case, there are 4 trails that all began at the same place. That's what this marker means. And on the left-hand side, you can see 5 different colors. That means those 5 trails continue in that direction for a bit till they split apart. And on the right-hand side, you can see the X's, and those mean don't go that way. The trail is really well marked. It's pretty hard to go wrong. Anyone can hike it. You don't need a guide or anything. Just follow the paint marks or ask someone else as you're going along, and you find out whatever you need. The morning that we left Portugal, we just had to walk a couple hundred feet, and we were already into masses of wildflowers. The coastal dunes in the spring are absolutely amazing for the diversity of plant life. It was astonishing. We spent our first day just wandering around in the Portugal area, taking photographs, getting a bit of that out of my system, because we were seeing so many plants that we'd not seen before, that it took a little while to get shots of them. And then the next day, we actually took off down the real trail. Anne has to put up with this sometimes. It's an unfortunate addiction. So again, masses of different wildflowers. The closer you get, the more you see. It really is astonishing. The trail itself is pretty quiet. You do see people every now and then, but most of the time you're walking on your own or with maybe a few people up in the distance. It's pretty sandy much of the way, but again, you run into patches of bedrock, of harder rock, and some areas where you're actually walking on roads, because you have to go inland a little bit to get around a dangerous bit of the trail. Right off the bat, you start to go up into the cliffs, and you're looking down at the coast for a good part of the hike, looking down at these coves and headlands and little beaches, and the really massive rollers that are coming in off the open Atlantic all the time. Is just constantly, we were seeing these big waves. With the first few days, we had these beautiful, clear blue skies. The water was a little bit turbulent and cold for us to go swimming. We did a bit of wading around, but that was about the extent of it. This is one of the first interesting plants. Oh yeah, and I didn't ever put the proper name on it, just my placeholder for the name. This is a sea daffodil, pancratium, which is a really beautiful plant. We keep seeing the flowers or the dead stems, but we keep seeing the leaves or the dead stems, but we've never actually seen the flowers. So I had to borrow this photograph from the internet. They're really quite spectacular flowers, and they're about 40 centimeters tall. And in places along the beaches, you just see hundreds and hundreds of these bunches of leaves showing that there are lots of bulbs there. But they flower at a time of year that we've not been. So unfortunately, the leaves are interesting enough. So we continue down the coast. We start to come into these big carpobrotus, these Cape figs. These are a South African plant that's become widely distributed because it is so showy and it's such a hardy plant in dry locations. You find them pretty well all around the Mediterranean. We certainly saw them in Greece. And they're close relatives of these ice plants, these Cape figs, growing all around the south of England as well. There are two color morphs that you see most frequently, the bright pink and then these yellowy cream colored ones, which again are spectacular. There were places where these were the main vegetation. They've actually taken over parts of the dunes and formed huge carpets. But there was still lots of other native wild plants, such as this helichrysum, this curry plant, that we came across many times. It's called that because of the smell of the foliage. It's similar to some of our wormwoods in that it has very fragrant foliage. Here's a little cluster of other plants that you'd see these things right in the middle of the trail, these little clumps with different plants. We'll look at them separately. This is the seaside campion, little silene like the musk campion that we have up on the highlands, but not quite as dense. And the leaves are quite sticky. They have glands, and you can see the sand on the right-hand side, sand particles stuck on the slightly glandular leaves. That's pretty typical. The blue plant was the dune bugloss, or bugloss, which was another interesting plant. There are quite a few different buglosses that grow in the Mediterranean area. And some of them have this interesting trick where the center of the flower is white when the flower is young, but as soon as it's fertilized, the center of the flower goes dark. And that's an indication to pollinators that they don't need to bother that one. The work's been done. There's nothing to be seen there. Continue on to the white flowers and spend your time on them. It's a really interesting indicator, a way that the plant has to develop to signal to pollinating insects. This is a little mustard relative, a little alyssum that was growing on the sands. It formed patches about 20, 30 centimeters across. I guess the flowers are fragrant, but we never did get down low enough to actually smell them, unfortunately. And sea pinks. We have pinks here on some places along the coast, but frequently on places like the Tablelands and the Lewis Hills and the Blomy Downs on serpentine soils. Ours is a different species. These are Armeria ruyana, which has quite large, showy flowers. The petals are actually quite large. And the plants get huge. They've got these woody stems and quite massive roots that you can see when the sand is being blown away. They really were astonishingly rugged and large plants. And we saw them pretty well the entire way along the route. Our sea thrift is on the right-hand side, and that's a pretty big plant. That's about as many flowers as you'd expect. And the petals are very short, so you just barely see them around the papery bracts at the base. They never get much bigger than what, 10, 15 centimeters across, whereas the Ruyana was huge. It was, gosh, over a meter in some places, a meter across and a meter tall. Pink catchfly was pretty well anywhere there was a moister bit of sand. And we'll see lots of it along the trails we go. And we saw lots of small animals too. There wasn't a huge diversity of bird and insect life, but we did see things quite frequently, like this little crested lark, which was right on the very first day. And then darkling beetles would be wandering around on the beach, looking for something to eat in the sand. And some of the beaches were really huge. They went for half a kilometer or more. with very few people on them while we were there, but you could see that they were used a lot during the summer. A lot of the rocks we were going through were deposited during the period when dinosaurs were coming to prominence and then winked out. So about 250 to about 60 million years ago. And these are sediments for the most part that were deposited about the time that the supercontinent of Pangaea was breaking apart. These rocks the rock in the photograph is a chlorite schist. It's so soft. It's muds that have been put under pressure, and the part of the rock is now very, very friable, very, very soft. This is what talc is made from. You can break it apart with just by scratching it with your fingernail. That's why some of these coves, I guess, are eroded so deeply and are so spectacular. This is a close-up of some of those ancient shales that turned into the chlorite schist. And here are some more rocks. The black is magnetite from sand that has blown up there, and then the wind has been strong enough to blow away the lighter quartz particles, but has left the iron particles, the magnetite particles, and that's what those black patches are, almost pure iron. And here again, you see the sand full of iron that's washed out of the surrounding rocks, and depending on the flow of the water, the iron gets left behind or gets moved, and you get these beautiful patterns across parts of the beach wherever you've got running water. If you have a magnet, you can just drag it through that and pick up the magnetite grains. It's quite fun. Further down the beach, you could see where people had been wandering around. These are probably mostly hikers from the last couple of days that left tracks, and it was a great place just to sit there and watch the world go by and then get back up onto the trail. More little birds, these little black redstarts were fairly common along the route. And we started to see a few of the introduced species. This is quite an invasive species, actually. It's called Cape weed, and it's originally from South Africa. And now any abandoned dry fields along the coast seem to be absolutely taken over by them. We saw quite vast swathes of them. Swaths. Some of the trail is used just by hikers. Other parts of the trail use sections of road. Again, these fishermen's routes. And so you'll see the occasional ATV or more likely a four-wheel drive track where someone's come down to the coast for a bit of fishing and then headed back out. But we didn't encounter much in the way of vehicles. It was really very quiet. And had we not known what was inland, we wouldn't have realized that all those farms and greenhouses were actually there. You're far enough in, you don't see them or hear them. It's just you and the coast. Once again, these trains of breakers coming in on the shore. There's bit of somebody's net or trap, I think, on the left-hand side there. One low wet area, freshwater wet area, had this big seaside rush. We saw these in a couple of other places too. They get way larger than the rushes that we have here. And this is very typical of the trail, where you have a trail wandering up into a dune and then wildflowers just everywhere you look. Occasionally you'd come into patches of forest. In this case, it's a juniper, a native juniper, and a couple of small pines. This is the maritime pine, the taller of the two pines that we we encountered on this trip. And it has masses of big serotinous cones on it, cones that stay on the tree for years and years, and in some cases stay on the tree unopened. Partly, probably because this part of Portugal is a place where wildfires have occurred fairly regularly over time. And our serotinous trees, for us, for example, like black spruce and jack pine, are important because they hold their seeds and some of their seeds until there's enough heat to actually cause the cones to open up and release them. And that's usually, the seeds are usually released after a fire has gone through. In fact, a fire that may have killed the actual tree that bore the cones, but was warm enough to release those seeds onto the fire-prepared seed bed. And that's probably what's happening with these as well. Here's a second pine, stone pine, usually much smaller and quite rounded, really beautiful, almost like a deciduous tree. That's what they look like from a distance, but they are a pine. In some places, they were attempting to stabilize some of the dunes. There have been blowouts, and you can see the fences in here to slow the movement of sand and to allow plants to revegetate the area and hold accumulating sand so that the dunes would grow back up. Other places, there were little parking lots, so the fishermen's parking lots, and you got a few peculiar plants coming in, such as this breadseed poppy, which I would not have expected in a dune, but it seemed to be growing quite happily there. These are the same as the pink ones that many people have in their gardens here. Opium poppy or Papaver somniferum, breadseed poppy. Yeah, it's a very, very common annual poppy. Okay. Some people were brave enough to get into the water. As I say, we tended to walk beside it rather than go in it. And then you have these guys. These are some of the fishermen that we were talking about. Every now and then you'd come to a headland, the waves crashing against it, and there'd be someone up there flailing away with a rod, hoping to catch a few fish to bring home. And it obviously is a very popular sport. Here's a fellow who's actually caught something. They're not big fish, but they seem to be very happy to get them. And at about this point, we started to see we saw our first stork. Everyone, I think, has heard about storks nesting on along the coast and all across parts of Europe, often on chimneys and houses and other structures. But here, they're nesting in the sort of natural conditions on sea stacks, like the one that Anne's looking at in the picture. You can see one little white dot out there. That's actually about a 6-foot high nest with a pair of storks on it. There you go. There they are in all their glory. You can see that nest was not built in a day. That's a nest that has been used and reused and reused and reused. It is massive. And often they're in extremely exposed locations where you'd think that the wind and the spray from the waves would be a bit of a problem, but obviously it works for them. They seem very happy there, and the nests have obviously held up for many years. So I don't know how they're sticking them together, but it obviously works. A lot of the coastal section of the trail has a hard cap rock, a very hard sandstone cap rock, or sometimes limey sandstone. And you can see on the right-hand side of the drawing, the thicker rock up above. And then below that, there's a much softer sandstone that's eroding quite rapidly. And so you get these overhangs, in some cases, 10 or 20 meters, well, certainly 10 meters of overhang, which when you're standing on it, you don't realize quite how much has been eaten away underneath you until you get past that section and look back. This is in the sandstone. It's an old series of worm tubes and burrows that have been preserved, again from about 60 to 200 million years old. It's hard to know which this section of rock was. And here, what were probably coral fossils, or maybe sponges, but probably corals. There are lots of little fossils all through here, but we didn't, unfortunately, have the time to really look at them in too much detail. The sand was interesting because it's all, like most sand, it's recycled. This is sand that has been washed out of the older rocks, those soft rocks below the overhang, and they have washed into the ocean, then been blown back inland. So they've been winnowed of pretty well all of the ingredients that sand would have been made from, probably originally granites and so on. And if you look closely, it's just pure quartz. And the quartz is very rounded, and it's also got a frosted surface. And that usually means that those sands were desert sands or dune sands that were being moved around by being blown, and by banging into each other, they've abraded the surfaces and given that frosted look. It's not water moved sand originally, but wind blown sands from 60 to 200 million years ago that are now recycled and thrown back onto the beach to form today's sands. That's what some people say about sand, is that once quartz is broken down to that size, it's almost indestructible. It's very difficult for it to be ground down or eroded or made any smaller. It's pretty well around for the long haul. We'll keep moving along the beach, heading south. Now we're well up high above the water. We're getting into some of the really succulent plants, like the pale stonecrop. It has white flowers, but we did not ever get to see those. And an asphodel. In the spring in Greece, we saw loads of different asphodels. On this trip, we only saw the one. This is a branching asphodel, or late flowering asphodel. Here again, you can see just how eroded the softer rock is below that cap rock, that harder cap rock, and the overhang. And here, actually, you can see a few people for scale. Four different people going, who will be walking over that same overhang that we've just gone over. And it really does go in quite a long way. It's thick enough you don't have to worry about it, but it just is a bit worrisome. This is a Portuguese gorse. This is a native species. The flowers were not quite open, and it was a very dense, spiny little plant. This is one that's died, so you can just see the spines themselves. You don't lean or sit or kneel or anything on those. You do look carefully when you're putting anything down. And this is common gorse. We saw more inland, and this is one that's become very invasive in other parts of the world, but is native to Portugal. It's a trail continuing along the coast, the wildflowers everywhere you look. Anne looking totally unhappy with this place. Weirdly, just in front of Anne, there are a couple little figs growing in the coastal bush there. Somebody either dropped a fig or a bird dropped some fig seeds. They're actually coming up on the cliff too. And here's the first, couple of cormorants, or we saw them sort of all the way down the route, getting closer to a town. So we're seeing the fishing boats. And then we were at Villanova de Mil Fontes, a lovely little town where we spent the evening. And next morning, went by this castle that was built to defend the opening of the river. And the next section is 15 kilometers. Our first day was 22 or something. First thing we saw in the morning was a whole series of cats that were being fed. There was a lady who was providing food for, I think she had 20 or 30 cats that she was keeping happy. It's a little ferry that took us across the river, and on the other side, we were really surprised to see how many lichens there were in some of the trees. It must be for some reason or other, that particular area was much moister. There's a lot more moisture in the air than anywhere else that we'd been. part of this was along a section of road, so we saw a few different plants that we weren't seeing inland, and then we got into the coastal series plants again. This is a centaurea, like bachelor's buttons or cornflower. No, well, cornflower, I guess is the common name. And it has the typical flowers that you'd expect for them. But the flower, the buds, as you see on the left, are spherical. That spherocephala means a round head because of those very spiky round buds. A little daisy or dandelion relative, bright eyes. Another kind of poppy, Papaver dubium, tends to be a bit smaller and lighter stem than the annual one we saw earlier, the cornflower, the bread seed poppy, and then the corn poppy, the Flanders field poppy on the right-hand side, growing among grains and lupins, yellow lupins. We also came across these. This is a little bulb, triangular leafed snowflake that was in places where they were growing. There were hundreds of them. They seemed to be very capable of living in places that had been beaten up a little bit, places where people again were parking cars. That seemed to be where they were the happiest. And they poke out right in the middle of the trail, not on the side, but right in the walking part of the route. So obviously they could take a fair bit of damage from people going by. And this is another one, similar liking for cordon sites. This is a little Romulea, crocus leaf Romulea. And it does look a lot like a crocus, but very tiny. These flowers are 2 centimeters tall, not quite, well, just about an inch. And this is one that I hadn't really expected. This is snapdragon, wild snapdragon or wolfmouth. And there were lots of these, all the same color, and they get 1.5 meters tall in some cases. Very glandular, very sticky plants that seem to be quite happy there. Here are a couple of plantings, like the lawn plantain that we have around towns, and the seaside plantain that grows along the coast. But instead of having round or long grass-like leaves, the buckhorn plantain, the leaves do look a bit like an antler, and the little dune plantain is incredibly reduced. The whole plant is only 3 centimeters tall, the one on the right-hand side. Back to the campions, masses of these campions. Ants were very common in the dunes. You'd see the land hole entrances, and I'm not sure what's been running back and forth between them. Probably beetles moving around looking for food. And even on sloping dunes, some of these anthills got quite large. They were moving a lot of sand grains. We'd also see things that were animals had been digging, probably foxes. It's about the right size. We never did find prints, but they were obviously very recent diggings. Snails were all estivating. They were snoozing for the summer. It was getting too warm for them, so they picked places higher up on walls or telephone poles or sticks or whatever, anything to get them up above the ground so that they weren't cooked by the radiating heat of summer. We saw only one little lizard as we were wandering around. I had about 2 seconds to get a photograph, and it was gone. This little Samodromus. It's only about 15 centimeters long. This is an alfalfa relative, seaside medic. Very, very fuzzy leaves, protected from drying out by this dense woolly covering. Parts of the trail were a bit congested by growing plants. In this case, it's an invasive plant called giant cane. It's now common throughout the Mediterranean, and it grows huge, like 6 meters tall. It can get very, very large. And any wet area, as soon as they get in, they can spread right through it and dominate it. For some reason, our cat is very noisy in the background here. Eurasian chaffinch was one of the birds that we saw. Lots of goldfinches flitting around. The robin, the European robin or Eurasian robin, absolutely beautiful little bird, very loud singer, very fearless, a bird that will come right up to you sometimes. The Eurasian serin and the little stone chat. It's a terrible photograph, but it's the best I could get. Back to the plants. Again, a lot of the plants we've already seen. At the beaches, the sand ranges from white, which is pure silica, pure quartz, to very, very, well, to orange, to almost deep red, not deep red, deep, what's a color that's closer to a brown? Anyway, rust, I guess, rust. And that really is dependent on the amount of iron that's still in the sand, still staining the quartz grains. Long beach. Whoops. Sorry, get back to Anne. A couple of the lesser blackback gull was the most common gull that we saw, although there were at least 5 or 6 other species that should have been along that coast. And I haven't looked at this long enough to try to figure out if there's anything else in there, but really, my guess is all lesser blackbacks. The next town that we spent some time in was Almagrave. Again, we spent a night there. It was decorated with lots of fish in different places, fish made out of driftwood, fish hanging on houses, fish. That was their obviously their theme at this point. Our next section was over 21 kilometers, so it was one of the days that we got up early and headed off, and hope that we made good time. In some places, the sand is too dry and the vegetation thins out, so you end up with very patchy, spotty plants. Any lower area will have vegetation because the water is closer, but the roots can get down to the water more easily. Where you have thick drifting sand, it's often too dry for the plants to survive. Here you can see just how much iron there is in that old crumbling sandstone. It's very, very iron rich. The great cormorant being unkind to a gull. Whoops. There were lots of little coves along the way. Any particular cove would, like here, have a place where boats could pull up and facilities for the fishermen. And in this case, we were just looking down and we noticed a fisherman's truck down there, and he was working away, repairing lobster or crab traps. I'm not sure which they were. And as we looked more carefully, we could see him working, and we could also see his co-workers waiting for the next haul of fish or crab or lobster, having a great day in the sun. This is a crowberry, a Portuguese crowberry, a little bit taller than the ones that we see around here. It's the name there is Camarinha, and it has really quite showy, large flowers. They're showy just because their antlers are so large. The rest of the flower is pretty insignificant, but the flowers, each flower would be about a centimeter across, and the berries, unlike our berries, are a pure white. A very, very different looking plant. And people do eat them. Another fisherman, or a couple of fishermen, I don't know how they get down to some of these places. Sometimes you see a rope and the guys come down the cliff on a rope to get there, but how he gets back up, I'm not really sure. Anyway, they were out in any kind of weather. Didn't matter how big the waves were, they were out fishing. Another great overhang on this one. We did come to a couple of sections where they'd actually closed parts of the trail because the erosion had caused enough damage to the cliffs that they were either rerouting the trail or they had to wait until they could actually make repairs. And in those cases, we had to walk inland along a road and then along another road, and then back out to the coast again. So it meant a lot more walking and much less interesting place, but it was still all good. There were lots of different kinds of rock rose there. This is one that we actually grow in our garden here in Rocky Harbor. This little yellow rock rose, and it survives through the winter here quite happily. This one is close to the ground. It's only about 10 centimeters high. A very colorful plant and very common along the route. This is a much taller one that grows about 1 meter high. This one has larger flowers, 4 or 5 centimeters across, with the black marks on them, or black or darker marks on them. In this case is a beetle eating the pollen on one of the flowers, seeming to be quite happy. Some of them do have the dark marks in the petals. Some of them don't. It's all the same species. And this is a relative that's in the same family, Cistaceae, but it's very short-lived. The flowers come out only for a day. They have almost no pollen. They don't have any nectar. They're not really trying to attract pollinators anymore because they're clistogamous. They are self-fertile, and they fertilize their own seeds, and then the petals fall off almost immediately, and the seeds develop, and that's it. They don't need the insects anymore at all. So they've kind of done away with the intermediary of pollinators. This is another tall one. This can get to 1.5 meters, almost 2 meters tall, with really big rose-like flowers. A very beautiful plant. The curlleaf rock rose. It's a spectacular plant. It was lovely to see it in flower. We'd seen the leaves of a lot of these in Greece, a similar species or same species. But this time we actually got to see them all in flower. It was wonderful. And sage leaf rock rose. This one grows flat on the ground, and it looks a little bit like mountain avens from a distance. Same size flowers, same colored flowers, and same sort of low growth, hugging the boundary layer right against the sand. And this one used to be commercially important for the perfume trade. Well, it still is in some places. It's called gum rock rose or labdanum, and the a substance called labdanum used to be harvested from the plants. They, from a distance, the leaves are very glossy. They're very shiny. You can see all of those light-colored leaves are this gum rock rose. And if you walk by them, you can actually smell them. It smells like balsam poplar in the spring, that beautiful resinous smell that balsam poplar has. And for thousands of years, people have harvested the resin that coats the surface of these leaves to reduce transpiration so that you don't dry out too fast. You can see the gum. And people collected them by using rakes covered with leather straps attached, and they'll pull those through the leaves, or they'll harvest the wool from sheep that have been feeding in among these things, and then use probably alcohol, I would imagine, to remove the resin from the stuff that they collected, the gum from the wool or from the leather, and they make these blocks, these labdanum blocks from the resin, and that's what's sold for perfumery. Back into the pine forest again, and we started to see these peculiar little yellow flowers bursting out of the sand. And this is a really interesting plant that is actually a parasite of those cistus bushes that we were just looking at, those white and pink cistus bushes. Vampire cups, yeah, it's the lovely name for them. Makes you wonder, but they are a root parasite on those cistus bushes, and the flowers are born very close to the ground because they're ant pollinated, and you don't want to make the ants walk too far. So the ants just have to climb up into those flowers, move around a little bit, and that'll move the pollen into place, and away you go. That's all you ever see of the plant. The plant is entirely underground, except for these clusters of flowers that poke up through the sand. And it is spectacular. It's tiny. Each of those cups of flowers is about the size of well, bigger than a toonie, but not a whole lot bigger than a toonie. They're well, 3 or 4 centimeters in diameter. Really amazing colored flowers. And we continue through the forest. We see weird things such as asparagus. This is where asparagus would normally grow on the upper beach and then into the surrounding forest. Clambering up trees with these little hooked stems. Brown bluebells, which is a weird name, but there they are, these peculiar bluebell-like flowers that sort of 1 or 2 here through the forest. You never see big clumps of them, but they're not terribly uncommon. Little cats here, a dandelion relative. These are the seeds. And toadflax, a very bright little toadflax, always in wetter places where there had been a bit of standing water earlier on. So they look almost like our horned bladderwort. The flower shape and the color is very reminiscent. But they're not insectivorous. They are just a normal plant. And off we go on the trail again. You start to see a few little lupins and things. The sky is starting to get a little bit cloudier and darker, but the waves are still rolling in from the ocean. Here again, we got a mix of iron-rich and iron-poor sands that are developed from those sandstones, those very soft, crumbly sandstones. It's almost blinding walking through these. It was like snow, a light reflecting from snow. You pretty well had to have sunglasses on. And it's just quartz, nothing else in there. This is a plant that's become an invasive in Portugal as well, bulbul bugle lily. It's a South African plant from the iris family, and it's it's tall, it's beautiful, it's elegant, but apparently it gets into wetlands and becomes a real menace. It can actually crowd out a wetland. Tree mallow is a native species. African daisy. This is similar to the yellow one that we saw earlier. Different genus, but again, it seems to be quite as adept at growing in the dry soils along the coast. Beautiful cistus. That's a sage leaf cistus, the white one, the rock rose. This is a place where people were wandering down to the end of the cliff just to take a look down at the stork nest there. You can see just to the left of Anne, a couple of stork nests at the tip. Here are people from a distance who've been looking at them. You can see the nest is just built on a little pinnacle of rock. I still, as I say, I don't understand how they can get them stuck in place like that. And here you see 2 nests, and again, a couple of people who've been looking at them. These are actually 3 English ladies who we kept running into along the trail or in restaurants in different places. They seem to be having a great time on their hike. Mastic is a common plant in Portugal, on the coast of Portugal, and into the Mediterranean. This is in the same genus as pistachio, the tree that the nuts come from. But this used to be used for chewing gum, mostly in Greece is where that was harvested. Tassel hyacinths are a really tall grape hyacinth that grows along the coast. They can get a meter high, and they have two completely different flowers. The top, they have these bright blue sterile flowers that never produce any seeds, and down below, that's to attract insects, pollinators, and then below those they have these brown, sort of inconspicuous ones, but they're very fragrant, and that they attract other pollinating insects. So this plant is going for two different audiences to do the same thing. And there are lots of different kinds of squill. We were never really able to successfully separate one species from another, but there are squills here and squills there all along the trail. White ramping fumitory is this is a pink form. Usually the flowers are white with a dark tip, and they're climbers. They clamber up the surrounding vegetation, similar to, well, the same family as our bleeding hearts and things like that. And this is a gentian relative, a beautiful little centauri that was growing. We only saw them in a couple of places, but what beautiful flowers. Sand spurry, this is a plant that has been introduced to North America. It's native there, but for us it's an introduced species, not particularly invasive, but very bright little plant of waste areas. And this is a very peculiar one called nail root. It's in the pink family, so the carnation family. It doesn't look at all like them. It looks, I can't think what it looks like really. It took me a while to figure out what it was, but it's a very unusual plant and seems quite happy in the worst possible growing conditions there. This is one of the first orchids we came across, the green-winged orchis anacamptis. It's called green wing because the flowers look a bit like birds with little green wings. The petals, little sepals, I guess they are. Anyway, the greener brown parts. A very small sea holly, very tiny eryngium. There's some really monumental eryngiums that grow in Europe, but this was the only one we came across, and it was only about 10 inches tall with very mildly blue flowers on the very far left. The sea holly that grow in the garden has metallic blue. It's an astonishing looking plant, but not from that coastal trail that we were on. Barbary fig is an introduced cactus, originally from Central America, probably, that has been in Europe for 500-600 years and is pretty well everywhere around the Mediterranean. As we went, we started to move through places that looked like this, where the trees were entirely non-native. And we'll talk about them in a while. These are yellow wattles. They were introduced as an ornamental, and they sort of done rather too well. Again, these beautiful long beaches, some of them very hard to get down to from the trail, but very enticing. Tiny petticoat daffodils, we come across patches of them. These were always in dry sites rather than moist sites, and they never got any much taller than 10, 12 centimeters. I think that was 12 was probably the biggest we ever saw. Most of them were right flat on the ground. Kind of expect a foot-long stem under there, but nope, I don't think so. And at the end of this day, we started to come in across heathers, patches of heather mixed in with the upper dune or upper beach plants. This is a dwarf Spanish heath that was in full flower while we were there. Beautiful color. Didn't see a lot of them, but just patches here and there. And there's another species called the tree heath that was growing a bit farther inland, closer to the towns. And these would get 3-4 meters tall. They really were massive. Another plant that we grow in the garden, this creeping Gromwell, Glandora now, I think was Lithosperma, Lithophragma, is the old name. It's a plant in the Braginaceae, the forget-me-not, right? Forget-me-not family. And has these beautiful blue flowers. It tends to like acidic soils. Three different clover relatives that we came across during our trip. Again, these lovely thrifts we came across as we came into town. In the outskirts of town, we saw Tropiolum or nasturtium can actually become a bit of an invasive plant itself. But we never think of it here because they don't last through the winter. But boy, these things are covering a fair chunk of ground. And canna, also introduced from Central America, South America. These were living in slightly moister locations, ditches and places like that. So this town is Zambujeira do Mar. We spent a night there and then headed south for another 19 kilometers. People were out surfing early in the morning, even when we got up. People were even swimming in the morning. So they were braver than we were. Got to see and hear a beautiful Iberian magpie. The back is blue. And unfortunately, we couldn't capture that in the photograph, but they're they act almost like a jay. Here we are back in the wattles again, the wattle trees. These are an Australian plant, as I say, introduced as because they're quite beautiful. They really are very colorful, but they grow really rapidly. They produce loads of seeds and they love dry sites and have become a massive problem in Portugal to the point that they've actually introduced an insect called Trichiligaster acacia longifoliae to try to knock back the numbers of these things. The wasp was released in about a handful of places along the coast of Portugal, including the area that we were hiking in 2015. And you can see all the galls that the wasps have produced on some of the plants that we were walking by. You see these masses of galls. And the galls are just swellings that are caused by the insect's activities and the eggs under the surface of the tree's bark. Causes the swelling, and then the small insects, the larvae, eat the insides of those galls. That provides food and shelter for them, and then chew a hole to get out and fly off, mate, and live to infest another tree. Anyway, the idea is to slow the trees down a little bit by giving them a heavy load of these Australian wasps to try to give them a predator that will give every other tree in the area a bit better fighting chance of growing faster than the wattles. And other trees that we were seeing from Australia were the eucalypts, and there are many eucalypts planted in the towns and along the coast. But again, they love dry soils. They do very well in dry soils. They have excellent wood for building purposes and so on. The only thing is that they can make a forest far more fire prone than it would have been without them. I don't know why, but at some point along the trip, we came across an ostrich. It was one lone ostrich in a fenced enclosure, and it was very inquisitive and came over to say hi. And then we just walked off and left it there. And we never did find out its story. More stork nests out on the point. And fields of wildflowers. In this case, it's lavender that we were starting to come into. This is the so-called French lavender with these long purplish bracts. Very, very colorful and very fragrant as you walk by it. You smell it in the air as you went by, or especially if you brushed it. Few little hills on the trail, nothing very much, but just beautiful scenery no matter which way you look. Here we're coming out towards a town, going through pines. And you see this field of yellow. This is a protea. These are Australian proteas that are being grown for sale to florists. And there were thousands of them in some of these fields. There are also vast areas of greenhouses we walk by. This is in this case, the net up above is a windscreen to protect the plastic, I guess. And here they were growing, and these ones, they were growing raspberries, these tall raspberry canes. That way they could manage the water and fertilizer and insects more securely, I guess, than they could if they had them in the open. Greenhouse trade is massive in that part of Portugal. In town, rosemary, massive rosemary plants growing on sides of houses, and yet another African daisy relative that's very common as a garden plant there. Up onto the trail again, and here's one of those dwarf lupins. This is small flowered lupin. There are, I think, three different species that we came across of lupin. And these ones seem to be growing mostly right on the upper parts of the upper edges of the cliffs. A peculiar plant with quite large beans inside these pods. This plant grew, what, 60, 70 centimeters tall. It's a very robust plant with fuzzy leaves. Giant fennel that's just coming into flower at that time of year. Beautiful little barberry nut, kind of iris, but about 30 centimeters tall, very colorful, not very common though. And now we're into some of the Orobanchaceae, the plants in the Orobanchaceae, these partial parasites or parasites, they're root parasites in most cases. This is a very beautiful one, the line seed. And these broom rapes, the line seed, at least produces chlorophyll and can produce its own food via photosynthesis. These two species are completely parasitic. They cannot exist without being attached to the roots of their host plants. And some of them, the fetid broom rape was growing, is that 50 centimeters tall? Really quite amazingly beautiful bronze flower heads. A small lousewort, another hemiparasite, and yellow glandweed, a wetland plant that probably is only partially parasitic, because you can see it's got lots of leaves. Viper's bugloss. This is, we talked about the buglosses earlier on, the one that was on the beach, a very small one. This one gets much larger. It's about waist high. And rue. And the wild gladiolus. There were places where there were hundreds of these in the ditches and the field edges. Phlomis, Jerusalem sage, fuzzy plant in the mint family with these big bilabiate flowers, very hairy leaves. The entire plant was fuzzy. Cork oak, we started to see these on in the last couple of days of our trip, deeply furrowed bark. And we also started to see trees that had been harvested in previous years, where the bark had been peeled off. You can see the stems of the two on the left. And on the right, there's a piece of bark that was actually left when a tree rotted out. You can see just how thick that bark is. Apparently, people are legally allowed to harvest them every 9 to 12 years, but nothing less than that, to give the trees a chance. Otherwise, the tree would be killed by over harvesting its bark. In this case, we had to move inland to, this was on the way to a town, I think.
Yeah, Odesh.
Yes, Odessesh. And Odessesh has these two big murals just outside on the side of the road. This one is, of course, the storks nesting. And then this one is about the seafood harvesting, mussels and octopus. And on the right, these peculiar goose barnacles. And goose barnacles are true barnacles, but and barnacles are related to lobsters and shrimp and crabs, that whole group, crustaceans. They don't look like them, but that's what they are. In this case, the goose barnacles are barnacles that have looks like they're wearing a turtleneck sweater. And that sweater has a big muscle in it that attaches them to the rock. So they can actually move around and hold their place in a rock as they're being buffeted by the heaviest of waves. So these goose barnacles are incredibly hard to harvest. They are edible. You only eat the turtleneck part once you take the turtleneck off. But they grow in very wave battered headlands and so on. So they're very expensive to buy and very hard to come across and very much relished by people along the coast. And we actually had the chance to try some of them. We were able to get some in a restaurant, and they call them percebish or percebis there. And you pop off the shell part at the top and you pull the little turtleneck off and you just eat the stem. And they're very lovely flavor. Although they look extremely weird. It was a fascinating meal and a chance to finally see goose barnacles. We don't get them very often here. Occasionally we get some pelagic ones that wash in. We had some about 3 years ago. But the true gooseneck barnacles don't grow on our coast. If you go out to the west coast, you can see them quite easily though. The other west coast, sorry. Anyway, this is Odyssesh, a lovely little town. Very steep hillsides and beautiful old buildings, lots of plants being grown by people, these little outside gardens. We had we spent 2 days here and had a couple of lovely meals and poked around in the area of town. Top of the town, the highest part of the town is an old windmill that's used as a museum. And from there you can see the fire that came right to the outside of town the year before. Burnt through all the trees, but you can also see that a lot of the plants that were under the ground have popped up immediately and are taking over and regrowing. From Odyssesh to Al Jazur was another 26-kilometer hike, 22-kilometer hike, a long day. Every now and then you come across donkeys. There weren't a lot of them, but people talk about them and you see signs. This is a sign in Odyssesh on one of the houses. Whoops. And sorry, and a donkey for sale sign, if anybody's interested. Down the river, away from town again, and we're running across things like wild almond, strawberry trees. This is a native arbutus that grows there. Unedo apparently means you can only eat one because even though the fruit are sweet and tasty, if you eat more than one, you're very likely to get a very sore stomach. You're likely to be ill. And loquats, this is an Asian plant that has been introduced throughout Europe and is a lovely spring fruit, very refreshing fruit. Calla lilies, as you'll see when we talk about the Azores, have started to become a bit of a problem. They do very well in wet areas, and we came across a couple of places where there were clumps, but nothing like the Azores. And we had one chance to look at what we figure it was a Bonelli's eagle, an uncommon small eagle, large hawk that was flying over us as we headed towards the coast. This is cuckoo pint, or jack in the pulpit, very common spring plant throughout parts of Europe. And yellow lupins, which were tended to grow in abandoned fields. A couple of butterflies now, cabbage white, the same cabbage white that we have here, which was introduced from Europe. An old world swallowtail, which looks very similar to our tiger swallowtail. Jackdaws, a crow relative with a sort of a gray head cap. And shrikes, Iberian gray shrikes. We saw a pair of them, not very close, which is why the photograph is a bit fuzzy, but They were fun. And cattle egrets, you'd see them very often when there were cows around. There would be the cattle egrets feeding on any insects that were stirred up. There's a fellow we came across who was greeting everybody walking along the trail that day and inviting them in for a drink and a talk, and really interested. Although he spoke no English and we spoke no Portuguese, he was a great person to try to chat about where we're going, where we were from, and so on. He really relished talking to the hikers. This is the little town of Rogil, sort of a Wild West town. We went into the sweet potato museum just because it was there. Couldn't pass up on that. And they had a sweet potato restaurant, which was amazing. All of these different things were made with sweet potatoes. Quite extraordinary. Anyway, they had a wonderful garden, lots of interesting plants and birds everywhere. And we had a sweet potato-based meal at the Potato Museum. Then walked through town, saw some of the local people taking in the heat of the day, saw the sweet potato monument, and sweet potatoes are those slug-like things on the sides, and then the tops are the goose barnacles. People were very proud of the goose barnacles and sweet potatoes. Spider flowers is an introduced species that was in that garden. It's Proteaceae, probably from Australia originally. This one from South Africa, sweet pea shrub. It's used in a lot of gardens in Portugal. We saw it again and again. Morning glories. These have the potential to be quite invasive, but they are astonishingly beautiful when they're growing. They were covering a lot of walls and gardens around towns. Harlequin flowers, not invasive. This was just in somebody's front yard. It was just such a spectacular flower. I took a shot of it. Same as this bulbine, which is in the asphodel family. The flowers are very similar to asphodel, but the color is amazing. And massive cabbages. People are able to grow cabbages throughout the year. So some of these cabbages are more than a year old, maybe a couple of years old. And you see these huge ones, and people use the leaves, but they also use them to feed for chickens and animals and so on. As we walked that day, we started to come across wild boar rooting sites where large areas of ground had been dug up by boars, probably the night before or 2 nights before. We never did see them, but we saw lots of places where they had been eating, either digging for insects or tubers or whatever. Corn bells, Ixia, which looked very much like the gladiolus that we looked at earlier, the wild gladiolus, but these are introduced, not native. Blue pimpernel, the very typical European spring flower, and scarlet pimpernel were pretty common everywhere. Intermediate periwinkle, like the garden periwinkle, but with a bicolor flower. Then we got to Algeciras, the last place that we stayed. You can see driving in Algeciras is interesting. Even the walking is interesting. The streets were very narrow and very steep. Lovely town. And the sky all that day had been getting darker and darker and oranger and oranger. And it was in Algeciras that we realized what was going on. It was actually dust that was being blown from the Sahara that was descending on that part of Portugal. And by the next morning, every car and house and road and slow-moving person had been covered with this reddish dust. And that lasted for a couple of days, the dust coming down. Then our last bit of this hike was the loop from Algeciras, just over 17 kilometers. We headed out of town, lots of typical plants you'd see in gardens and so on. Very colorful plantings along the roadsides and in the town itself. Lots of people surfing. These massive waves are perfect for that. And so they actually had surf schools in a couple of the places that we walked by. We started to get into palm trees as well as the pine trees. And here's an endemic plant. This is an endemic variety of a Queen Anne's lace. We have the wild carrot was developed from Queen Anne's lace. This is a beach form, a salt-loving form, according to its name, of Queen Anne's lace. And the leaves are very fern-like and dense and very hairy. The stems are hairy. The flower heads were about the size of a good cauliflower. And you can see right in the middle, the one purple flower that's typical of Queen Anne's lace, the dark purple flower. And this variety is a protected species in Portugal because it only grows in that part of the coast. Hairy canary clover. That's got to be my favorite name of all the plants that we came across. Massive, massive waves coming in. Again, they just don't seem to stop on that coast of Portugal. See how hazy it is. All the dust still in the air. There were warnings about air quality and so on. People were being asked not to exercise too much and so on because of all of the silica particles, dust particles in the air. Here we are back with the sea thrift. Spectacular plant. And another broom rape. This one was just on the dunes, not in the forest or roadsides. Beautiful yellow flowers. A little tiny Gannaria orchid, not quite in bloom, he just finished. Tongue orchid that we'd seen tongue orchids in Greece. This is where we start to see them here in Portugal. And the pyramidal orchid, another Anacamptis, sorry. And bee orchids. We saw a number of different species. And had we more time, we probably would have found more, but we were wandering along a road and I kept heading off into the distance and I'd find another orchid and have to photograph it. Now we get further and further away and I'd find another orchid and we get tinier and tinier and I'd find another. Anyway, after a while I had to start running. Oh, and the naked man orchid, which we had also seen in Greece, which was is always a hilarious orchid to come across. And beautiful pink butterfly orchid. These are astonishingly colorful flowers. Galangale is kind of fun. We only came across a couple of these. And there's a plant called sweet galangale that was another plant that was used for the perfume trade. The roots of sweet galangale, which is a much taller water-loving plant, used to be harvested for their fragrance. I don't know if these ones are fragrant, but these are very short. They're only about 30 centimeters, 40 centimeters tall, and they pop out of the dune. So I imagine they're pretty uncommon and pretty rare plants. Native sea daisy, very, very low to the ground. And a similar looking invasive, yet another from South Africa, that is doing quite well. And more fishermen, the waves crashing on the shore. Here's a fellow who's just caught himself a sea bream, one of the really treasure fish along that coast. Sandstock, like night-scented stocks. Pygmy cudweed, a tiny, tiny little plant that grows flat on the ground. And mossy stonecrop. You could walk past these and not even know they were there. They're only about four centimeters tall, little red spikes. And the lovely name, Villus deadly carrot. It doesn't really look much like a carrot, but it is apparently a fairly toxic plant. Anyway, at the end of the day, we came back to town and we could see on the outskirts of town a whole series of condominiums being developed. And from here south, people becoming much more, we were seeing people much more frequently. This is the really busy part of Portugal, the southern coast, the Algarve. And condominiums are really common along that south coast. We were just coming into it and we were just hitting the edge of that as we walked this section. And after the condominiums, we walked back to town and next morning, got our bus out, said goodbye to Algeciras, and heading back into Lisbon, I was able to catch this one photograph from the bus of stork nests in their new favorite habitat. You can see they do really well on pylons, power pylons. My gosh, again, how they anchor on those things, I have no idea. Back to Lisbon, and that was the end of our trip. And what did you like best? Anything in particular?
Oh, just getting up every day and walking, and
Oh, yeah.
it's just being in that beautiful environment.
Anyway, if you have any questions, this is the time. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll shut the screen down.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was fabulous. My goodness. We saw so much. I invite people to unmute themselves and turn your videos back on if you would like to ask questions or have any comments.
Anne, you take great picture. Take a great picture.
I'm good for scale.
So healthy looking. I know I was in the Algarve when I noticed there doesn't seem to be any beach developments in that whole section going
No,
down
well,
through, which is
the area that we were walking, and
That's an interesting point.
the Algarve as well, but it's all part of what's called the Parc Naturel de Sud-Ouest Atlanteo e Costa Vicentina. So it's not a national park, but it's a protected area. So what they've tried to do is they've tried to protect a coastal strip. And obviously people still, you know, they go surfing,
Swimming and fishing.
Yeah, so people still cut across it to get to the coast. But what they've really tried to do is they've tried to protect that coastal strip. And they've been most successful, I guess, in doing that along the Atlantic coast, because one, they're beautiful beaches, but they're backed by cliffs, so they're not necessarily accessible. And because it's the Atlantic, it's colder water, so it's not as appealing as the Algarve, right? Which, you know, once you kind of turn that southern edge of Portugal and you start to get more of the Mediterranean influence, you're actually in some cases getting into warmer waters. So I think there's more pressure on that area further south than there is right on the area on the southwest coast.
the one thing, you know, the ice plant. So is that it's not native to Portugal? Did you say come from South Africa? It seems extremely invasive, is it? It seems to be all over the place.
It is, and the problem, I guess, was would have been brought in as an ornamental because it does well in dry environment, but it's beautiful, so people would have started planting it close to the beaches. It produces quite large fruit. That's why they call it fig, because the fruits are about the size of a small fig, and they contain a lot of small round seeds. So birds will eat those and move them around. And they just grow very, very well in that kind of environment. They're there now. I don't see them ever getting rid of them. It's kind of like our moose, or all the other invasives that we have here. So they are now a part of that habitat. They are spectacular to look at. They're amazingly beautiful, but they do take up a lot of space in those dune ecosystems. They are covering a lot of ground. You're right.
And the picture of the two storks and the big deep nest is gorgeous picture. It's the last thing I'll say. It's beautiful.
I would love to know how old those nests are. That's a big pile of sticks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other
I
questions?
found it, I was going to say how remarkable it was that some things were so tiny that we would, to us, and other things were gigantic, like those cabbage plants that must have been about 7 feet tall.
That was a dandy.
Yeah, it's curious that things were either really big or really small. I don't know. But the climate must be really great for growing because things grow so well.
Places that, as long as you've got water, you can grow something all year round. Water is probably the limiting factor for anyone who's doing any gardening there, because it does get very dry during the summer, which is what we just saw when we were in Crete a couple of weeks ago, that we'd been in Crete in the spring, and it was very much like what you saw in Portugal, loads of beautiful flowers. In the fall, we were in Crete in November, there was almost nothing in flower, and what had been in flower was just dry and crisp and pretty brown. And even things like olive trees that are really drought resistant were beginning to droop and lose their olives. Fruit was falling off trees before it could be harvested because things had been so dry for the last 2 years. So it's always interesting to see a place in different conditions, and we were very impressed by what we saw, but I can't imagine what late summer would be like on that piece of coast. It would be really hot then.
It's a little bit like the East Coast Trail, you know, where all these communities have
Way more oranges though.
Yeah, I know. But the idea of doing, you know, this walk, I mean, we did, well,
about 100.
we were 8 days, but we really only walked five
6 of those
days. Yeah, 5 or 6 of those days.
those
Yeah. And of course it continues on for, I guess, another 5 days as you go around the Cape of St. Vincent and past Segres and on to the Algarve. And that's actually what we're hoping to go back and do maybe this coming spring. But you know, the idea of being able to walk from small town to small town and then just, you know, check into a little B&B and go out to a nice restaurant.
And the terrain.
And
down the beach.
And the terrain seemed easier. It seemed like an easy terrain for hiking, more so than even.
I hiked the entire thing in my teen sandals.
Yeah.
I didn't just bare feet and sandals the entire trip.
Yeah, there were some up and downs though. I mean, in between some of those.
But nothing.
Nothing
extreme.
Yeah, nothing extreme. Yeah, no, we found it that we met lots of people who were walking like with hiking poles, and but you really didn't need to.
But they were also wearing full mountain.
Some people had like heavy hiking boots. Yeah, which you really, no, you didn't need that.
Didn't need it.
Yeah. But it was wonderful to kind of see a piece of coast that is still quite wild.
And as I said at the beginning, when you were on it, you didn't even think about all the development in land. You had no real impression of what it was like in land until you had to you came to a place where you couldn't continue any further on the cliffs, and you had to head inland and then do a route around a couple of places where the cliff was starting to crumble away, and then all of a sudden you were wowed by the amount of
greenhouses or the whatever what was going on there.
And it was always great to get back to the cliff, the coast, because that's a lot of development.
Yeah, and we were pretty lucky with the weather. I mean, I think it wasn't hot, but it was pleasant. I mean, you know, like I wore shorts every day, and that was just perfect. Yeah.
Did you eat octopus? Going to ask you that because you made a reference on your Facebook page about the movie Octopus Teacher. And I watched that movie, and I don't think I'm going to eat octopus after that.
No, Michael hasn't eaten octopus.
We had
for a long time. We had cuttlefish,
and we had a bit of squid.
Yeah.
But no, the food was wonderful. There was a lot of variety. The restaurants, the little restaurants, even in the smallest towns, were wonderful. So lots of food, but no octopus.
No. We've had octopus once or twice, maybe years ago, and it was quite lovely. I mean, it was absolutely delicious. But it'll
be hard now.
We can't quite bring ourselves to eat it now.
Any other questions?
Yeah, questions or comments?
Is that a question up there?
Oh, my computer has no mic.
That was from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah. I would just encourage, I mean, because Portugal is becoming a very attractive destination for people to go to in in the wintertime. And I would just really encourage people to go, but take a little time and like kind of get off some of the beaten track and go into some of these smaller towns, which are very, very well equipped to welcome visitors. I mean, lots of little B&Bs and, air, what do you call them? Pensions, little places to stay, and some really, really top-notch restaurants. Because I think in the summer part of the year, everybody from Lisbon wants to escape Lisbon, and they go to the coast, right? They go to these little coastal communities. So they've got these wonderful little restaurants, and if you're lucky enough to still catch them open, the caliber of the food is just amazing. And I mean, they all have bakeries, they all have little greengrocers, and so no problem to find food to eat and so on. And it's so much nicer than staying in a hotel or a resort.
That picture of the guy on the cliff, I was wondering if he had a heavy fish. He could easily pull over. Anybody else see that?
That was a Sunday. There were a lot of people out fishing, so I think it was just it's like going out berry picking, right? It's what you do. If you can get out to the coast, you go eat yourself a few fish.
The guy who was plastered against the cliff. He was the one that had the big long rope that came down the cliff.
Beautiful, beautiful flowers.
Speaking of picking berries, the crowberry, the size of the crowberry, and you say people ate them, but were they? We pick crowberries and eat them. We make things. Were they as popular as our crowberries?
I don't know how popular they were. We only found out that people ate them. We don't know if they were making jams or pies or what they were doing with them. Just that they were eaten. We didn't
taste them.
It wasn't something that was offered in any restaurants or anything like that. So they can't be a lot of people doing it anymore. Sure. But
how about the sweet potato restaurant?
That was
your entire meal was around
they had
potatoes?
sweet potato desserts, and they had sweet potato mains, and they had sweet potatoes made into chips, and they had sweet potato pie.
Yeah, but I mean that is one of the crops that they grow there, and that
is that I didn't know that.
Yeah, that little town Rogil it's a little bit away from the coast. It's probably like 4 kilometers from the coast.
They still did
and the route, the trail, basically is routed away from the coast there to the town. I don't think it was just
the local chamber of commerce.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't think it was that. I think it was just the cliff was crumbling, and so then they routed you through the town. But because sweet potatoes are cultivated there.
Another
they
plant
decided to have this little museum.
Another plant introduced from Central America.
Yeah. But it was quite remarkable how what a nice presentation they did of all these different.
Wow. Fabulous.
And it came at just kind of the right time of the day. That was the thing, was most of the days you'd hike and you weren't likely to run into a restaurant or a cafe or whatever on your hike. So you had to pack sandwiches or whatever. But this was one day when you did run into a restaurant midday. Yeah. Perfect.
And I guess those little tarts are there too. All those little
yes. Those everywhere you go in Portugal, they have this little the crusted tarts. They're wonderful. Yeah.
What a day.
Michael, your photos were absolutely gorgeous.
Great.
Yeah,
they were
beautiful. They were absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. God, how much color there was.
Oh, it's such a beautiful area. Such an amazing area. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Michael, I have a little gift to send you in the mail when the post comes through, and I guess and Sue's is in the mail somewhere too. So eventually the strike will stop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming back again.
Thank you all for
Okay.
listening.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We'll see you in February. That's going to be our
Yes.
next
Uh,
meeting.
Not
No,
February,
no, a bit later, April or May,
April, May.
April, May, yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
I meant your next
February, we
meeting,
hope to be
yes.
back in Portugal.
Yeah. If things work.
If it
Keep
works.
traveling, keep traveling.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
holidays, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank-
Dan. Good night,
Thank
you,
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Karen.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Michael and Anne.
Karen,
Mhm.
Yes, John.
one question. This happened last time,
Yeah.
and it's happened again today. At the end of the shows, when I try and start my video, it says you can't do it. You
Oh,
cannot do
I-
it because the host has stopped it. And it happened last time
Probably.
too.
Oh,
Yes, John, happened to me
Okay.
too.
Yeah, it happened to you
Oh.
too, Heather. Yeah,
yeah, I did stop everybody's. So,
but it
I
won't
don't
start
know.
again. It happened last time. The
I-
audio is fine. It doesn't.
Sure.
Mm.
If you had spoken up, I would have easily opened you up, I think.
Yeah, well,
but
it was just at the
I-
end, right?
Yeah, I actually turned everybody's videos off because sometimes it's better that way. Well, believe me, it's a lot
But-
better.
But when
But, yeah.
when the thing is over,
I-
if you can you turn it back on or?
Not unless I could I don't know, I could invite everybody. Let's see here.
It's just because it
Let's
happened twice
see.
now, so I just
I
wondered.
could, okay, here, I could only ask you to start your video. So if you told me you were,
Okay, yeah,
if-
yeah, it
Oh,
worked
yes.
then.
Sounds
if you
just
would
bad.
tell me, if you would speak up,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. Yeah,
O-
I'd be happy
Okay,
to.
so
Yeah.
it's interesting. It was not just me because this was Heather
No,
was saying.
it's
So
everybody.
I have
Heather,
to ask you,
Yeah.
or
you have,
Yeah.
yeah.
you can't just do a mass start.
Okay, I'm going to say, I think that's for people who I turn their videos off. People like Marjorie, she had turned her own video off. I just saw her come back on.
Oh yeah,
She could do that, but since I turned everybody that wasn't off, you would need to speak up.
okay. So
Next time,
Okay.
speak up.
no, just I
Yeah.
was more curious than anything.
Interesting. And I hope, Charlie, you're listening and that you could see the program. But he's muted, so he won't speak.
How's Gene?
Jane's good, thank you. He had his surgery Friday. Yeah, Friday.
Was
Yeah,
that
he's doing well.
was that gallbladder or back?
Kidney stones.
Kidney stones. Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah, yeah.
So he
Yeah.
hasn't had
Okay.
anything done to his back yet.
No, they're
Mm.
not going to do anything. They can't do anything for his back,
Oh dear. Oh, dear.
sadly.
Hmm.
Yeah, but he's
Yeah.
feeling better. So,
Okay.
Yeah. yeah,
Well,
Good.
okay. Give him our best.
Well,
I shall do
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yes, I'm saying hello too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, say
Okay.
good night, everybody.
I'm out.
Good
Take
night.
care.
And leave
Yeah.
too.
Over and
Yeah.
out here.